Welcome back. You're watching The Agenda. Minister of Finance Tito Mboweni has convened a colloquium where government officials will present policy proposals to raise the level of South Africa's economic growth. These proposals will be tested through discussion with economists from the private sector and academia, including Professors Ricardo Hausmann and Robert Lawrence, both of Harvard University. The colloquium will also be attended by Ministers of Economic Development and Trade and Industry, as well as relevant government officials, private sector experts, and other strategic stakeholders. Discussions at the colloquium will place particular emphasis on interventions that encourage new models and paradigm shifts in support of faster economic growth. Our economics reporter Arabile Gumede is here to unpack things. Arabile, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Mahendra.
Tell us more about this colloquium.
Yeah, so I mean, it is a bit of a spur of the moment ideal, right? So coming together, I think you could tell that for one, Tito Mboweni decided that it was very important, despite the vacation coming to the fore, that we discuss South Africa in full and that it's not just a one-off discussion that South Africa keeps putting forward, right? So the importance here was that we needed to make sure that the world knows that we are trying to tackle our issues, no matter what the time of the year is, no matter what the situation is. And this is probably the best time to do it, despite everybody wanting to go on holiday. The key element here is that actually people want to get the job done. And, freeing up time in people's diaries is probably the key element here. And I think Tito Mboweni set forward to say to himself that we need to now push this ahead in order for government to know, for South Africans to know, and also to push to to 2019 elections, right? To send out a clear message that we are trying to fix South Africa's economy, considering the fact that, yes, fine, we may have pulled ourselves out of a recession, but one could say technically we're still in one, right?
Absolutely.
Growth is sitting much lower than population growth. And if we're not growing at the same level, if not more than population growth, then we're getting poorer every year technically.
Absolutely. So now, what do you think his strategies are to speed up the economy?
So that is the big question. One of the big issues that he said out first was that his big problem was revenue collection. Now, we've had clear indications of exactly what is going on there, right? We know exactly what the problem is. We've known this issue for quite some time. Exactly, yes. With SARS, Tom Moyane is still going back to the Constitutional Court now to try and say that he only got fired because of President Jacob Zuma.
To cling on to his position.
Exactly, trying to cling on for power. Now, the more that continues, the more South Africa suffers, because now we don't have the sufficient funding to fund state coffers and the ideas and the infrastructure development that we continuously want to engage in, right? So we find ourselves wanting to get more money, but we can't do it.
And also we're suffering the after effects of state capture and the looting of the coffers.
Exactly. So that discussion in itself needs to be one where we set a clear paradigm to say, okay, fine, we're now moving into an era where we want to do away with all of those things. So if in an ideal world, we're able to stave off and get away from the conversation of state capture and the like, what other plan do we have in place to ensure that South Africa builds on the current economic situation we have? Yes, we've got state-owned enterprises that owe more than 400 billion rand, right?
Yes.
But how do we move beyond that? How do we actually navigate through and around that? And I've always said that one of the biggest things here is that we need to let go of our credit rating. And I know it sounds counterproductive. I know it sounds like it should be a worrisome incident and we're going to owe more in debt. But what's the point of doing that if we're going to be conservative in trying to build the rest of our nation? We're going to sit there and ask ourselves, how do we then spend more? How do we build more? How do we actually give ourselves more money for education, whether it be higher education or basic education for that matter, if we're still doing it conservatively, only creeping up how much we spend on certain elements? In some cases, it may be prudent to actually ask yourself, you know what, let's focus more on ourselves, forget everything else, and bring down every other situation, and in 5 years' time, we'll sort the issue. I always make the example of Spain, where about 5 years ago, they had an unemployment rate similar to ours. And now they've cut it by 10% in 5 years.
Exactly.
We can do the exact same thing. I'm not saying that the dynamics are exactly the same, but what it is that it's hard work and focusing on what is important.
Yeah, and gives you a clear example on which we can focus on.
Exactly.
And then we have the timing of today's colloquium. You mentioned the elections looming. There's a lot of pressure to actually correct the ship.
Yes.
To right the ship.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, Tito Mboweni even saying actually that he's making sure that they pursue the correct growth path for South Africa. And he also said vehemently that they have no plans at all to increase the salaries of civil servants before the election next year. And the only reason I think he notes the election next year is probably that might be the end of his time. So he may actually only be finance minister up until then. But it is a clear message to say that we're trying to find ways to build the nation beyond just ourselves as the government, right? We're trying to find a way to ensure that we boost South Africa's economy beyond the plain 1% odd that we keep on getting.
And to make it sustainable.
Exactly. Now, the sustainability issue is probably one that I think a lot of people ask ourselves, how do we get that? So fine, we've got tax collection of above R1 trillion a year, right? Fine, we have that. But are we putting it into the projects that matter most?
Yes.
So are we finding ourselves just spending in the same areas for the last just number of years?
In the same conservative way.
Because that's how it's always been done.
Yes.
You know, perhaps a relook and a rethink of the entire budgetary process needs to be taken into account here. Maybe it's time for us to consider that we're not the average emerging market. We're actually an emerging market growing at developing market rates, and that's poor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for bringing us up to speed. We'll have to have a look at what the colloquium is going to be giving us.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people actually in that colloquium, as you mentioned, the OECD is here. Yes. The World Bank has decided to put somebody through here for that discussion as well. You know, Tito Mboweni even asked to make sure that the owners of some agricultural farming companies, the owners of ZZ2, make tomato and avocado farming, are also in there. Agri-SA, Yanni Rousseau, who is formerly of the Reserve Bank as well, and even some friends from Venezuela. They would know the situation really well. So,
absolutely. Arabella Gomede, thank you very much for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.